Hello and welcome to Of Mooks and Monsters. I'm Rob Ward.
And I'm Tim Niederreiter, and this is episode 89 of the podcast.
And we are finally back from break. We took a little vacation to kind of re-update our backlog to get back on track. We've both been busy. Summer's particularly very busy for me. So we wanted to welcome you into the next season, I guess it is, of Mooks and Monsters, with a new kind of episode. The format is called Lessons From, where we take something that is in popular culture, be it a TV show, a book, music, and we see what lessons we can take from that and put into a role-playing game, specifically as a GM, and what we can learn. So we're going to do one of our favorite shows, the animated series Futurama.
Indeed. Futurama is a terrific program, like the old school. But no, if you haven't seen Futurama, I don't know how many spoilers there will be here, but it's a great show, and I'd recommend it. Just about anybody who likes goofy cartoons, let's check it out if you haven't already.
Even if you're not a science fiction fan, you will definitely appreciate Futurama, because they really play with a lot of those. Even though they play on those tropes quite a bit, they have such a depth in what it is to just it like they really commit to the world and commit to the jokes, and yeah, and this is coming from someone that's not really a sci-fi fan.
Yeah. Oh, and also generally speaking here, for listeners, when we talk about these shows, we'll probably be talking about things we like most of the time. I think that's fair to say.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, it's definitely true, as we just told you, basically. So for starters, I think I there's one big lesson I could take from Futurama that I think is very it's very salient for my current games that I'm trying to run and stuff, and that's to enjoy. It's just ways to enjoy each session and kind of bring out the uniqueness of each session, because Futurama is almost, I mean, even though there are continuing characters, the show's about a group of characters, right? Especially, Fry, Leela, and Bender are kind of the main characters. But they, but every episode, it has some kind of concept shift to it, pretty much. Maybe not every episode, but a large number of them do. And you can see, so like, this is the episode where they get crashed on the Amazon woman planet or whatever, the China woman. Or this is the episode where they go to war, that kind of thing. They get drafted. And the way this lesson speaks to me, that aspect of the show is really strong, because they, like you said, they commit to all these jokes and these kind of premises of each episode, and so each episode can be wildly different. And that's something I personally don't think I do enough, actually. So that's why I'm trying. It's a lesson I want to take from the show, because quite apart from the fact that it's a funny show, having variety is really cool, and having this time the characters are doing this, and it's not always the same. And I've definitely fallen into the trap of saying my Mutants and Masterminds games being all about action, or my Recess games being all about machinations and stuff. But yeah.
And they bring a good variety of their adventures, each episode, because there's some episodes where it totally focuses on, like, I'm thinking of the one where Bender enters a space chef competition, where he's trying to be like an Iron Chef, and he's trying to make the best food there is possible, even though he's a robot and doesn't have taste buds. And he's cooking for humans. So everything just kind of goes haywire from there. Yeah, they just like to vary it up. And I think my first lesson that I could find from Futurama is the way they commit to the world building. Because they have the luxury, as a space opera, almost, I would say, to have all these different planets have all these different gimmicks with the planets as well.
Mhm.
The the Amazon woman uh, planet is one that really sticks out because instead of a patriarchal society, we have this matriarchal society with these women that are about 10 feet tall and are, speak like cavemen and just bash the hell out of other people. Um, there's an entire Santa's got his own planet. There's there's just so
Yeah, there's
much.
the Slurm planet or whatever.
The Slurm, which is all about
beverage
like a
comes from.
soda.
Yeah.
And just looking at, and just being able to take a gimmick, take what a theme, and it's a comedy, so they can get away with it a little bit more. But if you are devising if you have to make a town for your campaign, all you really need to start is just one big thing. Say that this is a town that, because towns in real life do this, this is a town where the main feature is the big rock.
No, like the rock that's over the town, or that is in the center town, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe it's called Rockville or something like that, or Boulder.
Oh yeah.
And you just you start with that rock and you work from there. If the people are of a certain religion, you go from there. It's very easy to take one thing and really run with it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, or like the planet where everyone's made of water and they're all in bottles because it's a desert. It's
Yes. Yes,
no,
that was a fascinating
example.
one.
That's a perfect example of what you're talking about, because they make a lot of jokes about how the leaders of the planet who are frequently assassinated, but they're assassinated by being drunk. Someone else drinks them and absorbs them, basically. So it's like, yeah, you've got this weird kind of cloak and dagger kind of thing, but it's so ridiculous because they're all just bottled water, basically. But anyway, of course that becomes the center part of the episode, because Fry stumbles into that and becomes involved and so on.
Because he accidentally drinks a new ruler, which they had sort of he becomes the new ruler because he assassinated the old one
by mistake.
Yeah.
So,
and you can also just take that and run with the cultural aspect of it as well.
Right, indeed.
Yeah.
Elaborate on that, though. What do you mean exactly?
For each planet has in the show their own way of doing things. The Amazons, the men, they banned men from the planet, so they ordered them to death by snoo being sex. So which was a really ridiculous way of the guy. Oh man,
there were a lot of good jokes.
I just love this show so much. The guy, okay, they have this execution for a reason, but the method is so weird.
Yeah.
Same thing with and just initial problems like the water people that live on the desert planet, and the way that they get a new ruler is by someone getting drunk. Just these inherent problems that cause your society to think differently. One of the main characters, Zoidberg, his planet, everyone kind of goes through a mating ritual every so often, which upon mating, they all die. And it's either a life alone or you die.
Right.
Because they're all they're pretty crustaceous creatures, and that's the way the show wrote them.
One other thing that actually, even though the world building is great in this show, and it frequently is really funny, and it really does contribute to the show, I want to say, and does run a little counter to the depth of the world building, that they're also not bound by it strictly, right? I mean, it's never like we don't really know what Zoidberg's people are like most of the time when they're not mating, but they were obviously capable of building spaceships and conquering the Earth in another episode, basically, you know. So just because one of their people was being persecuted there, that happens in one episode, but you know, it's those single episode things where this is actually a good quality, if you ask me, and it's that they're not being bound to explain how this race that dies as soon as they have mated, they don't have to explain, oh yeah, they're also a spacefaring power, you know. It's presumably all the ones that actually are going around killing people on Earth are obviously they've never mated because otherwise they'd be dead. But it's this kind of thing that if you look a little closer at it, it raises questions. So in that way, it's actually another positive, really. It's like, how do they go through? How does their society work like that? And you never have to know the answer necessarily to make enough sense and to be.
They show you instead of tell you how it works, is what I'm getting from what you're saying.
Yes, exactly. And there's actually very little explanation, and often they make a joke instead of explaining something, right? But that's partially just the nature of the show as a comedy.
Yeah, totally. Which, you know, comedy really frees yourself up to being a little ridiculous and not having to answer those questions as much.
Right. So one of the things that is very satisfying about the show, and this is the more consistent element of the show, if you ask me, at least in the first 4 seasons, which is what I'm more familiar with. I've watched each of those several times. So over the first 4 seasons, there's this kind of slow progression of the characters, because it starts off, of course, with Fry, who's kind of the central character, being frozen for 1,000 years. He wakes up in the year 30,000, of course, and then the rest of the show goes from there. But he's new to everything, and the show does progress with him learning about the world a little bit. I mean, he's such a dumb character. I mean, he's such an unintelligent character that he doesn't get very far with actually understanding how things are going to work or doing anything. But his relationships with the other characters change a lot over time, for the most, especially with Leela. And by the end of the 4th season, there's a semi-resolution of that sort of thing. And I find that really cool. But the fact is, it moves at such a glacial pace, and frequently there's these episodes that are kind of, they're kind of status quo episodes. We're not going to change that much, even when Fry, say, gets sent to the robot insane asylum, even when he comes back and he's no longer insane and he no longer thinks he's a robot after that. Even once he's fine, but that's a great episode. But it's also kind of that was an episode. We're all back to normal at the end, you know. And they do a very good job making those single episodes very satisfying, but also the overall arc of the storylines. It's very subtle, really, but they do a good job making it consistent, you know, especially early in those first 4 seasons.
Totally. They're not trying to rush anything. They are happy to live in the journey.
Right. That's a good way to put it. Because, and it kind of does tie in with my first point, which is, you know, that each episode is very distinct, and each episode is enjoyable, and you can take that to your game sessions. And that's really what I'm trying to get at there. Of course, is that if you try to separate this game into sessions, and this is the session where this is going to be a thing, and obviously, I think props and stuff like that can be very useful. Or, you know, we've talked about it in the past. The idea of using a different game within a game, you know, like playing a hand of cards in the middle of an RPG, for example, and that can make the game feel very distinctive. So there's ways you can kind of mimic that feel in an RPG. So sorry, totally. That kind of went back to the previous point there, but the progression, yeah.
My next point actually kind of piggybacks on yours. Going back to that Robot Insane Asylum episode, one of the things I really admire about the show that we can take into our role-playing is the introduction of new characters. The way they do it in the show is very smart. I'm not sure if it was his first appearance, but in the episode where Fry goes to the Robot Insane Asylum, we are introduced to the character of Roberto, who is this crazy robot.
I'm
who
fighting very hard not to do an impression of him right now.
hey Red,
There you go. You're better at it anyway.
just do we have to scratch that itch? He's just such a fun character because they're waiting in line at the bank, and Bender recognizes him, and he that's pretty much where the real adventure the storyline starts, because he gets them both involved in this this bank robbery.
Yep.
And he keeps on reappearing, and right away in that initial scene, he's really unhinged. And so when you see him later on in different episodes, he's going to become unhinged somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with Zap Brannigan.
Yeah.
Because he was built up in the episode when he was introduced to be this really, especially Leela, I'm saying the name wrong, but
you're okay.
Yeah, he's thought to be this really brave, heroic captain, this hero.
Mm-hmm.
And when you actually run into him, he's really this douchebag, this misogynistic, incompetent glory hog who's also a coward.
I was gonna say, yeah, he's also very cowardly.
Yeah. And he just makes all these bad decisions, but in the eyes of the public, he's still seen as this, hero.
Mm-hmm.
And he still gets and the players have this expectation, and then in an RPG, if this was to happen in an RPG, the players have this expectation, and it's totally put on its head, where this guy's an idiot. Because too often, I see, I played games where a GM would say, okay, this guy is, the best in the land, blah, 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 and he's just that. He's the best in the land.
Mm-hmm.
Or she's the most evil, and she is the most evil, or something like that, where the reputation is lived up to. I love it how it's not.
Yeah, that's a powerful trope, powerful idea.
Yeah, you could trick you can it's just like how the old phrase "never meet your heroes" is, from what I hear from some people, very true. It can or cannot be true. You can totally hype someone up to be this problem solver and just make them totally incompetent.
Yeah. No, that's a great example of that, especially because you kind of know that, Zap Brannigan by his accomplishments in that first episode with him, and then but then as you learn more about him, you learn that, and obviously when you meet the actual him, he's just this totally different. He's nothing like that. And even when he describes how he became a hero, it's clear that he was basically he wasn't doing anything particularly good or special there either.
And you also get introduced to Kip, who's his second in command, his lackey, really, to say the least. But he's a very reluctant lackey, and because he's a very endearing character. He's also very non-typically masculine compared to the very typically masculine Zap Brannigan.
Yeah. And
so that dynamic also, you get introduced to another character that's the opposite, but, becomes even more important as the show goes on.
Yeah, that's a good point. And because Kif does end up being at least as important as Zap. I mean, Zap's definitely, he chews the scenery more, but Kif is around many times, and Zap isn't too. So,
well, because somebody is that he becomes involved in a relationship with one of the secondary main characters.
Right. Yeah. So basically, you can see, and so that's a good example of also how the characters progress over time, but just characters in the show are very solid. They're very consistent, except when they change enough that you can tell they're supposed to be changing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I love that about the show, especially. I mean, they're and they are. There's also of course, there's the great subversions with Zap Brannigan in his opening episode, or the fact that Kif is actually braver than Zap, but he's just smaller and weird looking and all that stuff because he's an alien, and and he's not an obviously more heroic character, and especially because he's so downtrodden, being Zap's lackey. So there's definitely room for that dynamic in RPG, but it's also more specific, more generally. I mean, we can say that having NPCs that interact with each other, because really that's what we're talking about here. Neither Zap nor Kif are main characters, but it's clear that they have this kind of attitude toward each other.
Oh, absolutely, and
yeah, that's really cool.
And the nice thing about keeping that consistency is whenever we have an episode that comes up and you see these characters, you know exactly what to expect. For example, in the that first episode, we're all expect the main characters are expecting great things from Zap Brannigan. In later episodes, they see him and they're like, "Oh shit!
Oh, this
he's gonna fuck something up again."
Yeah.
Anyway, I saw alien boobies. I think that's one of his lines or something like that.
It must be. I mean, I can't remember all of them, but yeah, there you go.
He's got some real good gems if you haven't seen the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh geez, one of my favorite characters. But yeah, that's some lessons. Anything else?
I'd say I don't have much else to add at this point.
Yeah, really. I mean, there's we could go episode by episode of Futurama and just praise about how. Here's one thing else. One little thing. Just with when creating the characters for your when helping your players create characters for the RPG, you should kind of aspire to get a variety.
Yes.
Even if it's just like the secondary ones, because Fry, Leela, and Bender are the main three, and they all have pretty different personalities. And then you get some of the other characters that can or cannot, the people that are more likely to be the people that are not at every session, like me.
Oh boy.
So you have a Jamaican bureaucrat. You have a crustaceous doctor that's a poor and then that just is in poverty and is also has no clue what he's doing when it comes to humans. You have a spoiled rich kid. Yeah, it's just you could definitely just watch the show and see how different all these people are, what their backstory is, and see how they, these different personalities just interact with each other.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing you can take notes on, and that's valuable for characterization in RPGs especially. So, yeah. So I think that about does it for this episode, Rob.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been a Mooks and Monsters. You can find us on Stitcher whenever podcasts can be found. You can find us
MentalCellarPublications.com.
MentalCellarPublications.com. You can email us at podcast@mentalcellarpublication.com. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at StageHat. Tim's at TNeederwriter. You can like us on Facebook. And we just hope you keep on gaming.
Yeah, and find us on YouTube. That's the new one.
Yes, we are going to be transition. If this is not on YouTube yet, we will be on YouTube soon. We are working in that transition as we speak. So, thank you very much for listening to the show.
Thanks for listening, everyone.